right, good morning. All right, good morning, everybody. So we'll get started for today. So our first talk this morning is going to be from Jerry Chapman, who's a senior GMP quality expert from Redica Systems, who's going to talk to us a little bit about predicting quality risks. And so I will turn it over to Jerry.
Thank you, Michael, for the introduction, and I am really happy to be here at the oldest and best GMP conference in North America. So we're going to talk about predicting GMP quality risks at manufacturing sites, and I will explain what I mean by that as we go along. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to start with an introduction. We're going to talk about what we call assessing the GMP health of a manufacturing site, and I'll explain what that is as we go along. We do this using publicly available data, right? So there's no secret data here, there's no insider anything. This is all publicly available data, and we use that data to create something we call red flag models. And we're going to go into some detail on what those are and how we build them. And a big part of those, of the red flags, come from inspection documents. So what an FDA investigator, for example, or an MHR inspector finds on site feeds in. So we're going to talk about inspection documents and how we analyze them. I have 3 case studies, so we can kind of pull all this together and into these case studies. And then I'd like to spend just a few minutes talking about inspection and audit report caveats, because a lot of us use those reports, right? Whether they're our internal auditors or they're inspections by regulatory agency, and we use those to assess a site and how well a site's doing, and that's fine, that's good, but there are some caveats around that that are really important to remember, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So, introduction, I'm going to start with some news stories. So these are blinded. I found this nice little application that lets you make something look like a newspaper clipping, and I made up the journal titles. But the information is exact, and the dates you can see are very recent. So what we're seeing here is inspection findings at a third-party manufacturer that delayed drug approval, and the clinical data package was fine, safety, labeling, none of that affected the approvability. It was the manufacturing inspection. And then you can see on the right something very similar, pre-license inspection of a third-party manufacturer. A couple more just from last fall. A CRL prompted by a third-party filler. No additional clinical data or trials have been requested by FDA. And so as Jen and Christine mentioned yesterday in their presentations, we're not picking on third-party manufacturers, on CMOs, right? But our business models, a lot of us use CMOs. It's just the way it is. And so when we're talking about manufacturing inspections, a lot of them occur at CMOs. But the last one I have here was actually deficiencies at the sponsor company. FDA didn't flag any other issues with the BLA, but manufacturing inspection caused a complete response letter. So the question is, how do you choose your partners? What if you don't get to choose your partners, right? What if you are part of you're working in a company, and maybe you, all under the same company umbrella, you have the API manufacturing, you have form, fill, finish packaging, right? So you have these sister sites or these customer sites that are still all part of your network and owned by the same company. The methodologies and tools we're going to talk about can be applied to those as well. So you can use these to assess the GMP health of your own site or your own sites, within your network. And of course, that can be supplemented with any internal metrics, which we wouldn't have access to. As I said, this is all publicly available. So how do you choose a CMO or an API supplier or any other, GMP partner? A lot of times it comes down to financial statements and lowest cost. I could go on for a long time about lowest cost and the quality problems that lowest cost can buy. I've seen it many times. We're not going to talk about that. But we are going to acknowledge that that's an important input, right? We're all in business. It's an important input. But in addition to that, maybe you do paper audits. Maybe you do physical audits. Maybe you look at inspection reports, you pull some 483s or some warning letters, or you look at the business news. You kind of look at these things and try to get some sense of how you want to choose a particular partner. Are they what level of risk are they going to give you, right? So we're going to talk, I mentioned at the end, about some caveats around audits and inspection reports, so that's why those are in blue. And then we're going to talk a lot about agency inspection reports and prior company history and things like warning letters. And it's really important to remember that you want to look at trends over time, right? You don't want to pick a point in time and look at an inspection, right? You need to look over time. It's important, and we're going to talk about that. And again, emphasize that we're using publicly available data, and you can use that yourselves to augment your decision as you make these decisions. So let's talk about that. Redica Systems is a data company. We're a data and data analytics company. I'm not going to go into detail on this slide. I've seen my CEO talk for 20 minutes on it. Not going to do that. What I'm going to say is that we get a lot of data from a lot of places. And a lot of that data is dirty, right? It's not clean, it's not clear. We have FDA is the most transparent regulatory agency in the world. And they have a ton of information if you know where to find it. But it's all in disparate systems. Some of them are old. They don't talk to each other, right? And so some of them are scanned documents, right? So if you get a picture, like a 483, and it's a picture file, you can't do a Control F to look for contamination or whatever in a picture file, right? So those have to be, we have to put them through optical character recognition and retyping and proofing. All right, so what we do is we take really an unstructured mess of data and pull it together and make it usable and make it all talk to each other. I'm not going to talk a lot about this slide. What I want to call your attention to, we are trying to kind of link everything to everything in our world, in your world. But what I want to talk about specifically here is this thing on the right that says Redica ID. If you have a manufacturing site and you want some information about a site, right? We're talking about not a company, we're talking about a site, a physical site. How do you identify that site? You know, not every site has an FEI number, right? Not every site has a DUNS number. And even if they do have an FEI or a DUNS number, those numbers don't always appear in all the documents associated with those sites. Sometimes it's an address, and sometimes that address is ambiguous. Sometimes it says RD period or RD no period or road, or it doesn't say it at all, or there's a typo in the address. And so getting that information and pulling that all together is something that we have spent a lot of time doing. And what we have done is we've taken this information from these sources on the left to create something that we call a Redica ID. So it is a clean, aggregated master ID for a particular site. Doesn't matter if it has a DUNS or an FEI or neither or whatever. It's assigned a Redica ID, and so from that ID number, everything feeds in so that you can, from that number, find out everything you want to know about a site that's publicly available. All right. We're going to talk about the things in the circles here. Last slide on my company, we have more data than any non-governmental regulatory agency. And I confirmed that with a lot of people. And I'm not going to go through these numbers, but you can see it's a ton of stuff. We use that data for a lot of things. Inspector profiles, just a lot of different things. But what we're going to talk about today, what I want to talk to you about today, is something called our red flag models. What is a red flag model? So it's a holistic approach to evaluating the GMP health of a particular site, right? So what we do is we examine factors that we believe are indicative of GMP health of a site. We look at those factors, we assign relative weights, positive and negative. Individual factors are combined for an overall score, and then, as I mentioned, it's important to look for trends over time. And the title of my talk, Predicting, right, the GMP health of a site, is accomplished by looking at trends, right? So you can assess this health, you can assess over time, and then you can look at the trend. You can look at the trajectory. Is it going up? Is it level? Is it going down? And that gives you at least some predictive ability that you can use for making informed decisions. Now, something that's really important that you all need to keep in mind as we go through this is that in our model, lower is better, okay? Like golf, so remember that. Remember the little golf guy will appear from time to time. And that's just a reminder to you as you're looking at these numbers that lower is better. And why lower is better, you'll learn as we go through this. So here are the factors that go into our red flag models. And I just realized that I left my water over here, so I'm going to grab it while you're looking at that list. I'm not going to read through that list, but I am going to go through each one of them and explain what each is. So the first one is inspection reason. Why was the site inspected? Okay, everybody gets routine inspections. Maybe it's a pre-approval inspection, but keep in mind if it is that they're generally more limited in scope because they're product specific, right? Maybe it's a for-cause inspection. If the agency has reason to believe there's an issue, there's a for-cause inspection, that tells you something about that particular site. So depending on what the reason for inspection is, feeds into our model. Then you have the inspection, then there's an inspection outcome, right? So FDA classifies, right? You're familiar with NAI, BAI, OAI classifications. And then there can be enforcement actions, whether from FDA or this is not completely FDA-centric, right? We have a lot of information from EMA, from their national competent authorities, and MHRA, and from Health Canada that all feed into that. So the outcome of the inspection also feeds into our model. And then you have enforcement actions that are linked to specific sites. These include recalls. So recall is something that is kind of a pet peeve of mine. You know, in my opinion, after many years in the industry, if a company has a recall, that means their quality systems failed, right? They didn't find the problem inside. It got out of their plant without them identifying the problem. That's a big deal to me. And so recalls feed into our model. If a site is put under import alert, that certainly says something about it, as does a warning letter that is issued to a specific site. Then you have enforcement actions linked to organization, right? So a site is guilty by association, being part of an organization. So if the organization gets a warning letter, for example, for misbranding or a consent decree or a CIA, that also tells you something about that particular site, potentially. And then there are specific citations that are not part of 211, or we're talking about 211 from an FDA standpoint, not part of the regulations, maybe it's Health Canada, it's a CRC, or it's UDRLEX, or whatever it is, not something that is not a manufacturing deficiency that is found on inspection, because we separate those, we treat those separately. You'll find out in just a moment. So you can see that there are other specific kinds of things that can feed in to the red flag model. Inspection timing. Let's say that you are thinking about doing business with a site and you find out they have never been inspected by a regulatory authority. FDA, EMA, MHRA, Health Canada, and Visa, nobody has ever been into that site. That presents a certain, at least potential level of risk, right? How about time between inspections? Let's say they get inspected, like clockwork every 2 years, but what if it's been 5 years since the last inspection? That produces a at least potential level of risk. Things drift over time, right? And then inspection duration. If you're talking about a particular inspection, was the FDA investigator or MHR inspector, whoever it is, were they in there for a day or 2 days, or were they there for 2 weeks? Right? So that makes a difference as well. And then who was there, right? So we are fortunate that we have Simone here, who is a national FDA national expert investigator. We've got Ilian, I think are you both still here? Yeah, sitting together. Okay, there you go. So a national, you folks probably know, but if you don't, FDA National Expert Investigator is like, there are only maybe like 5 of those for drugs, 5 or 6 for drugs right now, right? That is the pinnacle. That is the top level of an FDA investigator, and those people are good, right? But they're also busy. I mean, they stay busy with a lot of things. They do training, they work on policy committees and things, but when one of those people is sent out on an inspection, that means that FDA wants their best there. And why do they want their best there? Usually because they think there's something going on, or because it's a very complex kind of inspection, right? So those carry a certain level of risk. We also, in our system, we have what we call high-profile investigators. We have 70% of all the 43s that have been issued in the last 20 years, and those have all been digitized. We've got all the information from them. You can pull all that together, and you can find for a particular FDA investigator all their citations that they've done over those times, and what's their warning letter issuance rate. And so we tend to assign a higher level of concern if someone who is a high-profile investigator with a 10% issuance rate of 43s, of warning letters from their 43s goes out to site. So that is somebody used to be somebody like Peter Baker, for instance. Then you've got a brand new investigator, right? So these are all relative to each other. These all feed into the model. Who was there at the site gives you some idea of the potential perceived risk or issues at that site, and also the level of expertise that went in and produced the report. And then there's the size and composition of the inspection team. A couple of people, big group, who was in that group. So the 8th and final feed into the red flag models are observations and citations from parsed, tagged inspection documents. What does parsed mean? What does tagged mean? I'm going to explain that in just a moment. And as I mentioned, we have FDA, EMA, MHRA, and Health Canada. So we're going to take a deeper dive into this category, and I'm going to explain what those terms are. So analyzing inspection documents. This is the process at a high level that we use, not necessarily in this order. Some of these things can go on simultaneously, but these are all elements of that process. We build classification models. It's important. If you've got all these citations or observations, right? With an inspection, it's an observation, right? You've got all these investigator observations. How do you make sense of those? I mean, you've got this whole laundry list. You need to have some way to organize those. You need to have categories to put them into, a way that you can make sense of those. So we build a classification model. We have to get the documents of interest. So not that, these documents are all of interest to certain people, but for what we're talking about today, what we're talking about are the drug CGMP inspections. So there's a lot out there with GCP, good tissue practices, compounding pharmacies, tobacco. We don't care about those right now in this particular analysis. We're just looking at the drug CGMP ones. And once we have them, we have to put them into a machine-readable format. We already talked a little bit about that. Then the documents need to be parsed. Parsing is putting these, identifying the sections, different sections in this document. So if you look at an inspection, you look at a 483, you look at a warning letter, there are various different sections in that document. There is only a portion of that we're interested in for this exercise, and that's the deficiencies, right? What deficiencies were found on inspection? That's what we're interested in. And if you don't do that, if you just do a general search, you're going to get, and we've experienced this when we were building these models, you're going to get a lot of false positives. You're going to find things that are identified in the request for information section, for instance, where FDA is requesting certain information, but that wasn't necessarily a deficiency on the inspection. So it's important that we have these parsed. We're going to talk about teaching in AI and then how we created a scoring model. So first, classification. This is our current human drugs GMP classification model for classifying inspection findings. I say current because just like CGMPs, this model changes as well. And so you can see that we have the 6 familiar quality systems plus data integrity. Kira gave a great talk on data governance and data integrity, which I appreciated hearing. But it's not its own quality system, but it is a theme. It is a strong theme that can occur across all these 6 quality systems, so we isolate it separately. So we take these inspection findings and put them into categories and subcategories and sub-subcategories so we can get a really granular look at where the deficiencies occurred. Now, our initial models were based on natural language processing tools. So things like you take the text and you remove extra spaces, you do spell check and you get rid of typo, you do parts of speech tagging where you diagram sentences and stemming, and then things called n-grams, which are sequences of words that we use to look for. And that model was good, and we're still using it, but we're working on our next generation powered by AI, which will be coming out really soon. And we'll be talking about what that is and how that's different from this model. So the documents are parsed, findings are tagged. So in other words, how is that inspection finding mapped to this map that I just showed you of the 6 quality systems and all the subcategories? So these are a few examples because it had subs and like 6 subs. It didn't go into what all of those were. So these are some examples. I would say they're in no particular order, but they are in a particular order, which you're going to find out in a subsequent slide. Next, we're moving beyond the natural language processing n-gram model, teaching an AI. And so here is some AI output, and here is how that model is going to be a little different. If you look up at the top right, you see that we have area. It's called area, and then L1, L2. That's what you saw a few minutes ago, where we had the 6 quality systems plus data integrity. Each one of those is an area, and then you got a category and a subcategory. So that hasn't really changed from that particular model. But we've added something called a common object and deficiency reason. So a common object is an object that is common, right? It's something that you can find a lot of different places. When we were building these models and talking to some customers, one of the conversations we had was, they said, you guys are really good at finding this stuff, but for example, let's take an example of deviation investigations. FDA always cites the quality unit for deviation investigations, so they're ultimately responsible to make sure those investigations are good. But you know what? We want to know where that happened. Where was it? Was that in the packaging and labeling system, material system? Where was that deficiency in a deviation investigation? So a deviation investigation is a common object that can be found across several different systems. And then deficiency reason is, why was it deficient? So you can see here, on the top left, this particular document happened to be handwritten. We have older ones that are handwritten, and even if they're not, if they're just a scanned picture document, you still have to make it machine readable. And then once you do, then the AI goes to work, and it says with 91% confident, we think this is in facilities and equipment. We're 91% confident this maps into the subcategory of equipment, subcategory of preventive maintenance. The common object here is calibration. Because calibration can happen in manufacturing, it can be in the labs, it can be in your scales and your materials, weighing area, whatever, right? Calibration can be a lot of places. That's the common object, and the issue is that it was not performed. And then as a little bonus, our thing we call our AI assistant tries to use some logic to map this to 21 CFR 211. And it'll give like in this case, 211.68a. And it will give us that and then say, and here's why I think that is the case. So here's a second one. And we've got, basically a similar kind of thing where we're looking at the area L1L2 common object deficiency reason. So we've gone to this point, we've created these, we've found the deficiencies, we've mapped them. Again, this is the inspection piece we're talking about, right? So then we needed to create a scoring model. And this is the slide you saw a few minutes ago, and this is the order that they're in, from really bad to not as bad, top to bottom. So data destruction is bad, right? That is, and so is, issues with cleaning of equipment in sterile manufacturing, because that can produce, right, issues with aseptic processing. So those are higher compared to some that are lower, and we score these. And then combine those scores with the inspection metadata. We've talked about that metadata. The other kinds of things out of those 8 pieces that feed into this model. And we combine all that to create an overall site score. So as we look at that other data beyond what has been found on inspection, this shows you a table of how we score these. And this is another reminder, you see our little golf guy there, lower is better. Now if you look at this list, you can see down at the bottom, no 483, minus 10. FDA goes in, does an inspection, it's NAI, they get awarded a minus 10. If on the other hand, a corporate integrity agreement or consent decree comes out of it, it's a plus 40. So we've spent a fair amount of time with myself and other experts going through and doing this scoring that feed into our red flag models. So now I'd like to kind of pull all this together with these 3 case studies. And I call it A Tale of 3 Sites. And I actually need to start with a disclaimer. The data you're about to see are true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent. So, just the facts. That's what I'm going to present to you, just the facts, ma'am. That's what Jack Webb always said, right? Sergeant Friday. Love those shows. So, before I get into the actual 3 case studies, a few caveats. Completeness of the data needs to be factored in, right? If you can't compare 2 sites when you've got one with a few data points and one with a bunch of data points. They have to be equivalent. You need a robust data set, robust site history for a reliable score. Because these are variable in their completeness. As I said, this is all publicly available information, but we get what we get, right? And so we don't always have as much complete data as we would like. These 3 case studies were chosen based in part on having good, robust data systems so that we could compare them. And we're going to look at some blinded, again, there's 3 case studies, they're all blinded, and some visualizations of these with a cumulative score of the last 10 years and 5 years. And we're going to talk about the inspection finding, red flags, and what those are, and how they contribute, and then based on other factors in the model. And before I get into this, I just want to mention that we have one of our Redica employees, Elena Inova. Elena, are you here? There's Elena. These visualizations that you see, she created. Okay, so we have these data systems, and she took it upon herself with a few other folks to figure out how to make these cool visuals. So, again, last time you'll see the golf guy, low score is better. Okay. Also, these 3 case studies, instead of numbering them 1, 2, 3, I lettered them, and they're letters A, C, and F. And you can decide what that means as we go on. So here's site A. Okay. Cumulative score, last 10 years and last 5 years. Pretty good, right? And you can see that we've got data over the past 20 years. And this is a cumulative site score for company A. what goes into that? Well, there are no critical red flags. There are none that are red for this particular site. You can see that they had some sort of a major finding all the way back in 2011, right? Other than that, pretty steady and improving. And if we look a little deeper into that, you can see that there's only one major red flag. This is not the inspection stuff now. This is the metadata, right? There's only one major red flag, and it's not critical, so it's major. It's orange, and that is you can see that there was a for-cause inspection, and that was back in 2011. Right, so it's been a long time ago. And if you look at the bottom, and I know that's hard to read, you will have the slides, but those are color-coded, and those are the various pieces. Did they get a 483? You know, was it an expert investigator? Was it a long-duration inspection? Was it a quick turnaround? You know, did they get a VAI? Right, so those are the things that feed in there and get rolled up into the cumulative score. Now let's go to the next one, which I call Site C. You can see the cumulative score. The last 10-year score we call very poor. We have cutoff numbers for very poor and good and great. And so this one's kind of interesting to me. You can see from 2000 up to about 2012, it looks pretty good as far as these numbers go, these cumulative scores go, but something happened. And over the last 10 years, it got very poor, although there's been some improvement in the last 5. So where did this, you know, what are the inspection pieces of this? You can see, again, from 2000 up to about 2010, not a lot going on, but then after that, we're seeing a number of major red flags. Again, these are from the inspection. So we showed you the inspections, how do you categorize those, and how do we score those? That's what you're seeing here. And then you can see how that rolls up together. And then these are the other red flags outside the inspection. So 7 of them were critical. And you can see those, you know, range from some OAIs to non-compliant. You've got 14 major flags, and you can see that those include some for-cause inspections and some terms and conditions documents that were issued. And then down at the bottom, the minor, and again, those are color-coded, and you can see what those are. Or maybe you can't, but you'll be able to. You'll get these slides. I'm sorry it's so small. Then we're going to go to the last one, I'm calling this one Site F. So you can see that over the last 10 years, the score was very poor, and over the last 5 years, still very poor, although not quite as bad. And here's what found on inspection. What was found on inspection, and you can see a lot of majors, a lot of criticals that have happened over the past several years. For critical red flags, that includes a warning letter, which happened in 2022. And then again, you can see the major red flags, terms and conditions, for-cause inspections, and then a whole host of the minor ones. So this is something we don't have the time or really the format to have a discussion about this, but it's something I want you to reflect on as you think about this, about what did you learn about these sites and how they compare with each other. And is this analysis something that would be useful as you were looking at GMP partners, who to partner with? It kind of occurred to me that this at least has some similarities to what Ashley Bohm talked about yesterday with the PQS assessment, at least to some extent. And then Jennifer McGuire's going to be talking about quality management maturity. This seems to be at least related to that. And then also, it kind of feels like a site selection model for FDA in a way, although it's not, but a similar kind of thing, I think. So I told you that I wanted to talk a little bit about inspection and audit report caveats. So those reports, we use those reports, right? And they're an important component of a company, GMP health. We all use them, maybe exclusively. Maybe you say, well, I don't know if we want to work with the CMO or not. Let's send a couple auditors out, and then whatever they tell us, we'll decide based on that. The issue, my concern is not to rely too heavily on the results, okay? They're good, but there are some caveats, some things you need to keep in mind as you look at those reports. And so I wanted to include, and probably most of you, if not all of you, have heard the parable of the blind man and the elephant, right? Where what each particular blind man thinks this thing is depends on what he experiences, right? So what did he see? And it's something similar for inspections and audits, right? Where did they focus? What did they see? And what's their experience? So some things to think about. Inspection, report caveats. The focus of the inspection. Was it a narrow focus? Was it a broad focus? How much time was allotted, right? Did you say, oh, well, yeah, go inspect these folks. You got to be in and out there in one day because that's all we can afford, right? How much are you going to see and find, right? Because these are all snapshots in time. What about the experience and training of the inspector or the investigator, right? Is this someone who knows what they're looking for and can recognize the implications? Is this someone who can recognize where there's a thread to pull, right? So that the cloth unravels, right? Or not. And then for internal audits, this thing called support for findings. And I'll just mention briefly, I've been an internal auditor and I've talked to internal auditors, and you'd be surprised how many of them say, when I'm done with this internal audit in my own company, right, I'm gonna have to present this to a site head or to, and the quality head for that site who's like 5 job levels above me. And ideally, you would think that person would say, thank you so much for finding these things so we can fix them. But instead, often what happens is that person's going to say, show me in the regs where this is a problem. Show me an FDA inspection where they found this and it was a problem, right? And so internal auditors have to have support for their findings. And a lot of times, and I know this happens, they'll say, I know that's an issue, but I can't point to anything that's going to back it up, so I'm just not going to include it. So that's just something to think about. I'm not saying that happens at your company. I'm not saying it happens at all, but we know that it does. And then remember, too, that, and this is a given, but just remember that an inspection is just a snapshot in time, right? And so I want you to think about these factors as we look at some inspection results. So this is like a series of snapshots over time. And I will tell you that it's the same company that I used for my case study, Company F. Here is that company's inspection history over 11 years. And when you look at it, you can see it's varied, right? Remember, each one of these is a snapshot in time. So let's say that you were interested in this company or in looking at it, and you went in January of 23. That's what you would have. That's what you would see. That's the most recent inspection. That would tell you something. It would tell you a lot, actually. But instead, let's say that you went in June of 21. And you don't have, you're not omniscient. You don't see everything, right? And the company you're inspecting maybe doesn't show you everything, maybe. And so let's say you're in June of 21, and these are what you see, or what you're shown. Well, in the last year and a half, we had the National Competent Authority of Poland come in, MHRA came in, Health Canada came in. They didn't find anything. Well, who knows, what they found or why they were there, right? So it's important to point out that that this green check mark means either that there was no issue observed, right? So they got a clean bill of health, or it means that we don't have enough data to determine. We can't figure that out. We know there was an inspection, but we don't necessarily know the outcome. There is not an obvious 43 or whatever that went with that inspection. So they're snapshots in time. Maybe they were in there for one day. Maybe they were in there to look at a specific thing. Maybe there was a customer complaint about a particular thing and they wanted to go in and it's all they looked at, right? Who knows? The point is that you need to be cautious with inspection results, right? So, to wrap up here, the GMP health of a manufacturing site can be determined to some extent using publicly available data. And I've shown you how we do that. The data and trends can be useful when choosing CMOs or other GMP partners. You can also use this data to evaluate manufacturing sites, within a company, as well as between companies. Completeness of the data is important, and then relying on inspection and audit reports alone comes with certain caveats. So, with that, I thank you very much.
So again, we'll encourage questions. And again, if you are online, remember to use the chat function there, and we'll take your questions as they are filtering up.
Wow. That's a lot of questions.
All right. This just shows you we have not run out of yellow cards yet. Not run.
Gentleman first.
Oh, no. That's not the way it works. It doesn't matter, Jennifer. Go ahead. If you're ready, go ahead.
Okay. So, first question here says, how do you define or establish that a drug shortage was prevented? So there's some requirements around when the agency should be notified of a potential drug shortage. So when those notifications come in, it engages our drug shortage staff. So at that point, they know that there's a potential for a shortage. They will work with a site to see what can be done to make sure that that potential shortage doesn't materialize into an actual shortage. And an actual shortage would be if the current market supply is unable to meet demand. So they can consider a number of things. I mentioned some of them in the slides, but if we can expedite review for the implementation of changes, in very extreme cases, if we can import drugs from other countries that have something similar approved. So there's a number of things that can be done to make sure that the supply meets the demand. And so long as the supply continues to meet the demand, then we would say that the shortage was prevented. If we can't do that, that's when you'll see the shortage get posted to the drug shortage website as an actual shortage.
Okay. I have my lapel mic on. Can y'all hear me? Okay. So, do non-regulatory factors such as geography, location, age of company, experience, history of executives impact the scoring? Those would all be good inputs if we had access to them. We do have access to geography, but we can't really ding a company just because it's in a particular country or location. because there's really a lot of variability in the, quality, so we can't do that. And then other factors, experience and history of the executives, and we don't have access to that data. Those are some good ideas, but they're not part of the current model.
Okay. So this says, has the FDA considered recognizing other available maturity assessments, such as the one ISPE, APQ, St. Gallen OpEx work, et cetera, versus recognizing only the FDA program? Yes. And you want me to elaborate? Okay. So we have considered recognizing other. So certainly we encourage sites that find value in the ISPE, APQ program and PDA quality program to participate in these programs. Obviously anything that can enhance or mature the quality practices at a site is a win. I think there's some concerns in that what we hope to do with our program is be able to offer incentives for participation and to also have a standardized tool that's administered not by the site. So some of the tools available, while useful, there is a risk of bias because it's a tool that you self-deploy. And we all know that can lead to biases. So there are challenges with some of the available tools, but there are strengths as well. But obviously I'm biased to like our program. And then can you comment on some of the possible incentives? So this is an area of active discussion. It's one of the questions that we asked in the docket. It's one of the questions we've asked in facilitated discussions. It's interesting because there wasn't necessarily one thing that jumped out that all sectors of the industry are looking for. So some sectors actually don't want us to reduce our frequency of inspection because inspection outcomes or positive inspection outcomes is valuable to them and their business, while other parts of the industry said, please inspect me less. You're here all the time, and if it's not you, then it's another authority. So they would be interested in reduced inspection frequency. Some of the other incentives that we are considering, so the certificate of participation was something that came up. Waiving PAI is something that's been discussed. Reduced surveillance inspection frequency. There's others. There's obviously a strong connection between demonstrating that your site is mature and your ability to implement ICH Q12 and benefit from regulatory flexibility. So the ability to make that connection has come up. There are others, but those are the ones that jump out for now.
Okay, question. Within the data modeling, is there a possibility to predict GMP health for these sites into the future and inspection outcome? And if it has been done, what has been the accuracy? What we think we can do, or what we think you can do, is to take these data and look at the history and look at the trajectory, right? So you saw some of the sites where maybe from 2000 to 2010, they looked pretty good, right? Well, if you had tried predicting during that time, they would have continued to be pretty good during that time. If you tried to predict it at the pivotal time when something changed, the prediction may have been off, right? So we can really only predict based on the trajectory and on the information that we have, and it's only going to be as accurate as it is, right? So no, we don't have a way to gauge the accuracy of the predictions.
Okay. Does the Office of Quality Surveillance use inputs from providers in focusing efforts towards quality surveillance? thinking input from providers for medications already on the market. So yes, one of the programs that lives in the Office of Quality Surveillance is the post-market program that considers information about product quality defects in products that are on the market. So my office is responsible for reviewing the FARs, BPDRs, and MedWatch complaints that come into the agency. And so those MedWatch reports can come from providers. So we actively review all of that information and have developed algorithms and models to help us identify trends and clusters and signals in that data. So that is an active part of the information that we use in our broader comprehensive quality surveillance program, and it is also an input into the site selection model.
Okay, going into the future, do you have plans to develop a QMM score, and do you collaborate with St. Gallen? Answer is we haven't really discussed that. I can see where that's something that we might get into at some point, but we haven't discussed it, and we don't have any collaboration with St. Gallen's at this point, but those are certainly things that we could explore down the road.
They're mine. You can't work with them.
What?
Sorry,
St.
we're getting territorial up here on who.
No, we could share.
No, actually, they're mine too, so forget about it.
I'm just kidding.
Okay, there you go.
Sorry, this card has multiple questions. Has FDA considered to implement the program as a certification program? Not sure exactly what that means. Perhaps maybe certifying, like more akin to the PDA quality culture, ISP, APQ, where you are trained on the tool and certified to use the tool, and then you deploy the tool on your own. If that's what this means, I commented a little bit on that earlier. Right now, we're considering an implementation of the program where either the agency or the agency and potentially contractors would implement the program as like a non-biased third party. But we have discussed this and the limitations of that approach and the pros and cons. Where can the indicators for the program be found? Okay, so we get this question a lot about will we make the protocol public? So right now it's not final. It's in development phase. The purpose of this pilot, not pilot, the evaluation program that's announced in the FRN right now is for us to use the tool that we've developed and get some preliminary feedback. We think it's a good protocol, but there's always opportunities for improvement. And so after we use it on a limited number of sites, we'll continue to refine and tweak both the protocol itself, but the rubric we're using to score, as well as confirm that the practice areas we've identified are the right practice areas and the underlying elements in each practice area are the right elements and that nothing has been completely overlooked. So for now, we have a white paper that does go into what the 5 practice areas are. And it does give some examples. So there's that. You can definitely see what we're thinking. If you want to know more about what's in the protocol, you should volunteer for the program, because then you'll know when we ask you questions what the protocol has. But long term, we have had discussions about if it would be possible to make the protocol public, and we haven't made a final decision. We're leaning that way, but it would be just the questions. We don't intend to make the rubric for scoring, and everything that the assessor is listening for, because there's questions and there's things to listen for, and all the training and the nitty-gritty details wouldn't necessarily be public, but we do see value for at least making the high-level questions available publicly, and so we're actively considering that when it's final.
Okay. Let's see. You had confidence metrics for computer processing of the inspection reports. Have you developed similar confidence values for your other generated metrics that take into factor things like how much data is available or the inspection caveats you discussed? That is a really good question. The confidence limits were generated by our AI program, right? And the AI's confidence that the value it was producing was correct, right? We do not have similar confidence values for other metrics, or, for example, how much data. What we try to do is ensure that we have a comparable amount of data to do these comparisons. And if we said, well, we don't really have enough data to do this comparison, the best answer is don't do it, because it's not going to be accurate, and it may even send you the wrong direction. But some of the inspection caveats I discussed and confidence around some of these other things are some really good things that we certainly will be looking into at some point.
Okay. Is there a future where the QMM results may be used as part of the risk-based approach to select sites for inspection? Possibly. I think we're a ways off from incorporating it in the site selection model directly, because we would have to impute a lot of missing data right now, because the scope of the program is small. Long term, this is one option, but I think it's more likely that this will be an input into our broader comprehensive quality surveillance program, which we feed into a lot of regulatory decisions deciding when we should go inspect or when we need to sample and test. So it's definitely information that would feed into our broader program. Whether or not it feeds directly into site selection model is different.
Okay. Does the Redica ID follow companies through purchase, acquisition, name change, et cetera, to allow GMP history to be accurately traced? Yes, it does. We have these things called family trees that you can see in our system that relate companies to companies over time, and it's incredible if you look over time how things have changed. And to be able to find a company and say, who owns that company? Is that another Pfizer company or not? What is it? We have that in our system. It's dynamic, and so yes, that Redica ID does take that into account, and those changes are put in as soon as we know about them.
There's a question here, because this is an assessment of sites, how will virtual companies participate as we don't own the sites? So this is a good question, something that we can definitely take back and think about. The assessment itself right now isn't necessarily developed to assess virtual companies. It really depends what the virtual company is doing and what GMP responsibilities they've maintained versus what they're using different sites for. But nonetheless, a good question that we can take back and try and provide a little bit more information about in the future.
Okay, let's see. How does quality push fewer decisions to be made based solely on the cost in the absence of red flags, i.e. quality can fix it mentality? If I knew that, I'd be wealthy beyond the dreams of avarice. It's tough. The only thing you can really do is to try to show examples. There are examples that you can find out in the marketplace where companies have purchased other companies, and what they bought was a whole lot of compliance problems that cost literally billions of dollars to fix. One of the companies that was in one of my case studies is actually an example of one of those companies. So, I mean, I don't know. That's all you can do. You can just point to that and try, to do the best you can. Unfortunately, it just seems to be human nature that if you're the Lone Ranger and you ride into town and fix the problem and ride back out, you get all the credit rather than the person who prevents the problem from happening to begin with. I don't know how to solve that, but it's kind of the way it is. So I'm sorry I don't have a better answer to your question.
Would you accept foreign companies as volunteer establishments as one of the 9 volunteers you would be looking for? If by foreign company you mean a company that supplies for the U.S. market and is located not domestically but outside of the U.S., yes. Any site that manufactures at least one drug product for the U.S. market and has had at least one initial surveillance inspection can apply to be part of the program. So we're not looking to target only domestic sites. We would consider foreign sites that supply the U.S. market.
Okay, with the red flag model focused on 211, how does it handle API manufacturing issues? If I implied that it was focused on 211, that was incorrect, and I apologize for that. What it's focused on is I showed you the 6 quality systems plus data integrity and all those categories and sub-subcategories. We have a model that maps API deficiencies to those as well, right? So even though FDA can't cite Q7, it uses Q7, right? And foreign regulators, right? EMA, that use Q7. So we have APIs that are incorporated into our model, and they figure into this red flag model just as well as finished dosage forms do. Have you shown your red flag model to be predictive of future actions and events? We haven't at this point. This red flag model is very new, right? We have a few customers who have access to it to try to help us kind of pressure test it. It's in a beta mode at this point, so it's not in general release. So we haven't had it around long enough to really be able to, to look at that. And then do your models consider geopolitical risks? And they do. I mentioned that a few minutes ago, or addressed that. We really do not at this point.
Okay, I'm going to group these 2 cards together. So I'll read, they're sort of long, so I'll read them and then explain why I'm grouping them. Okay, so is FDA doing anything about PBMs? Is any FDA office working with FTC on this negative economic factor in drug market? Okay, so that's one. And then if QMM could drive a price differential, but the ultimate customer is the patient, is not the decision maker, but the health insurance company is, how will the insurance companies be educated, or is it going to continue to be a race to the bottom? So both of these questions deal with us engaging with partners or other parts of the government or Congress about things that FDA doesn't directly control. So FDA, as you know, doesn't set price. We don't necessarily work with insurance companies or the Federal Trade Commission or PBMs, but we do a lot of technical assistance and engagement. So, we do talk to stakeholders about unintended consequences of the program and what the implications of the program would be on other parts of the entire system. So, we provide, what's the right word? Subject matter expert input into some of these things, but a lot of the things on this card are outside the direct remit of the agency. So we're there to answer questions and inform, but wouldn't be in a position to make some of these final decisions. But these conversations are ongoing. That was my last question. Do you have any more?
No?
Are there any other
That's it.
questions?
All right. Well, perfect. Let's thank our speakers for a great session.